Welcome to the CanMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amirault. I'm the marketing manager at Medicinal Genomics and proud member of the team that puts on the CanMed conference. Head over to canmedevents.com now to learn all about our CanMed 2022 event, which will take place May 3rd through 5th at the Pasadena Convention Center in Pasadena, California. This 3-day event begins with a full-day medical practicum led by Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, the practicum's originator, as well as Dr. Dustin Sulak, Dr. Kevin Spellman, and Eloise Thiessen. Each of the presenters will share the latest research as well as their clinical experience and practice guidelines related to cannabinoid therapeutics. A new section of this 8-hour course is dedicated to reviewing different types of extractions, products, and optimal dosing for cannabinoid therapeutics. After that, we have 2 full days of presentations and panel discussions covering the latest research in the cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing taking place May 4th and 5th. The full schedule is up at canmedevents.com. You'll notice that each of the CanMed focus areas are anchored by a keynote presenter. Dr. Ethan Russo for science, Seth Crawford for cultivation, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein for medicine, and Grace Bandong for safety testing. Each of our keynotes, as well as many of our presenters and panelists, were guests on the podcast, and you can listen to all our previous episodes at canmedevents.com/coffeetalk. While you're at canmedevents.com, you can also watch video presentations and panel discussions from all of our previous CanMed events in our CanMed video archive. Presentations include CanMed 2022 keynotes Dr. Russo, Seth Crawford, and Dr. Goldstein, as well as Professor Raphael Meshulam, David Meary, Marcus Rogan, Zamir Punja, Stacy Gruber, and many, many more. As you can tell, we have a lot going on at canmedevents.com, and the best way to keep up with everything is to sign up for email alerts using the simple form in the page footer or on the pop-up form that you'll find at canmedevents.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Just look for CanMed Events. This episode, we welcome Collin Palmer, who is the Chief Experience Officer at Vessel Life Science. Collin has been obsessed with growing cannabis since he started growing in his backyard at 15 years old. Since then, he has consulted with many cannabis companies on a variety of areas, including genetic selection, lab optimization, product development, branding, and more. Over the past several years, he has worked on bringing that experience to Vessel Life Science, which has been focused on working with several brands to bring new solvent-less products to market in 2022. During our conversation, we cover Collin's journey in the cannabis industry, starting with his first plants to his current projects, the education and mentorship he received from cannabis cultivation pioneers, how regulations create barriers for legacy growers to participate in the current cannabis industry, how business pressures stifle innovation from commercial cultivators and encourage copycat tactics, why THC and CBD values alone do a poor job of describing cannabis products, the fact that how and when cannabis is harvested, cured, and dried can influence taste and experience for the user, why plant pathogens seem to be more prevalent now than ever before, how plant pathogens, especially hop latent viroid, can destroy a cultivation business, subtle cues that hop latent viroid infected plants can show, and more. Before we get to my conversation with Collin, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Pheno Express. Pheno Express offers low-cost genetic testing services to cultivation facilities. Using qPCR technology, Pheno Express helps cultivators identify genetic traits such as plant sex while plants are still in the seedling tray. They can also identify plant pathogens such as hop latent viroid, lettuce sclerosis virus, and powdery mildew before plants show obvious signs of infection. Contact Pheno Express today so they can help you predict, prevent, and eliminate major crop problems before they happen. To learn more about how you can accelerate your pheno hunt with Pheno Express, go to phenoexpress.com. That's PHENOXPRESS.com. Okay, and without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Collin Palmer. Good afternoon, Collin. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So I'm really excited to talk with you today because I know you have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas of cannabis cultivation, from breeding to extraction. You can even call it from seed to sale. And I know in our email exchange before we started recording, we identified a couple different topics that we want to cover. But I thought before we get into that, a good way to get started might be appropriate for you to tell the listeners a bit about yourself, how you got started in the industry, and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. The cannabis plant has been a part of my life since I've been a young guy, meaning 15, 16 years old. I started growing my first plants, really in an amateur sort of way, being influenced off of books from Mel Frank and things that I was reading. A lot of pop culture kind of influenced me, from the Grateful Dead scene to the Fish scene, and of course, other styles of music like jazz. I got really excited about plants at a really young age, and cannabis was, to me at the time, really the ultimate plant to explore. There was a lot of, it was very apparent very quickly that there was a lot to this particular plant and a lot to explore. So, whether that be different types of varieties or, just the plant morphology in general was very interesting at the time. And that really, drove me into looking and reading and researching. And it drove me to places like, laughingmoon.com, which was run by a Canadian group, which, kind of formed into, overgrow.com from the old British Columbia Growers Association's days. And there was a wealth of knowledge. There were people like Vic High and Subcool and Dave Watson, Robert Clark, and several other individuals that were posting information that I could quickly grab onto and start to read and start to iterate on my own version of what that was at a young age. Immediately I've been an artist my whole life. And I started studying horticulture in a really serious way as I got into my 20s. I went to school for art and design and science, and I studied organic chemistry during that time. I went to school in New York and had a really big deep dive into that world of looking at, just organic chemistry in a really open-minded way. And that's what led me to cannabinoid extraction and really starting to learn about what that was. I immediately started washing hash in 1999, and that was my first forte into actually extracting any type of cannabinoid from the plant, and any type of chemical, so to speak. So it was, those days it was a hot wash. It was, ice and water, middle of the day, or mixing with a wooden spoon or a spoon. And then you're drying it in these large patties, creating pretty much charas, which is a type of hash that's a cured resin, that's an air dried resin. And through that time, you started noticing the nuances of extraction through that simple process. But it also got my curiosity into solvent-based extraction. So I started, playing with ethanol, and as soon as the other types of extractions came around, I was naturally just interested. But circling that back into where I began and why, it was really the idea of art and science merging together that really caught my attention to this. Is that, plants were like art. You grow these things and they're immediate. Art is very immediate. It's a very immediate function and reward that you can, give yourself. And I really enjoyed that simple pleasure of that. So that's where the idea of growing lots of different varieties at a young age came into play, because it was very fascinating to see a California orange next to a skunk or an NL5, sitting next to a strawberry cough or a sour diesel, and you could see the not only the polymorphic differences, but the aromatic properties and the actual just the presence of the plant structure itself really was immediate in terms of the reward that you saw, and then the exchange of information between comparing and contrasting those. It was really interesting to me, and it really just drew me into the world of just getting into reading everything that Dave Watson had put out, and Skunkman Sam had put out, and diving into Robert Clark's literature, and then going even further, going into real, looking at white papers that I could find, and ultimately becoming friends with, Marcus Richardson, who's a dear friend of mine and somewhat of a mentor at an early age of all this. We were exchanging lots of information, and so it just kind of snowballed from there. But it was really the intent and the ideology that we could learn more about this plant, and it was immediate, and we could actually react to it. That simple thing actually, through the years, grew into what I would consider today an actual business, which I didn't really plan for at all. I wasn't, I never really, it's not that I didn't believe, I didn't really know where this was all headed. And I knew at some point we would be able to grow these plants in mass population as we see today. There's more people growing this plant than there ever in the world. So, with that comes what we see of an industry. There's the good, bad, ugly, and the legacy farmers, and then there's the new individuals that are coming into the industry that are now interested because of interests that are beyond the plant. Quite frankly, the plant is a part of it, but the driving factor is not the plant in most cases.
Yeah. So you started when you were 15.
Yeah.
So you must have had either some understanding parents or some parents who weren't paying much attention. Which was it?
I had some parents that were understanding and also cautious at the same time.
Yeah.
I think my dad was really encouraging, and he didn't actually believe that I could manage all of it, honestly. And when he saw all of it, he kind of chuckled and said, "Well, at least you know what you're good at." And I was obsessive, like every day after school, straight to the patch, and this is outdoor at the time. The indoor was really difficult at the time. A young guy like that,
Sure.
You're not growing under lights like that. It's But what I would say is it was all I thought about, all I could think about every day in and day out. That, art, and music were the three things for me that were just all encompassing. It's all I cared about. And still to this day, it's quite frankly, it's all I truly care about. And it's interesting, it's like music, cannabinoids are really dynamic, and like harmonics, you have this moment where things come together and dissipate. And that's cannabinoids to me in a nutshell, after you've combusted them, or you utilize them for delivery. So, they have this beautiful harmonic frequency that they bring to your body, and your body is able to grab onto it through endocannabinoid system, which is very individual. Just like how sound travels to your nervous systems and the rest of your body. So with that said, I had an opportunity to build a company in the state of Massachusetts. So I spent the past 3-4 years of my life dedicating my time and to bringing all of the things that I've researched and consulted on, because I was a consultant before I went after my own license. And I was working with several different outfits to optimize their workflow, lab workflow, their SKU creation, their branding, their go-to-market strategies, how a product sits in a market, and why that said SKU should be made. And these are questions and things that need answers to, that you'd be surprised. Not many people have answers to them
Hmm.
in the market today. So I think there's a big white space right now. And there continues to be, because the spirit of cannabinoids is still widely really understudied and underutilized. So yes, we have products, we have things that we grab onto, such as TAC and the ideology of terpenes in by volume. But these are widely understudied and underutilized in terms of quantitative and qualitative results. So when you look at these things, we're at this moment in the industry, there's a really great opportunity for innovation and expansion in the terms of product SKUs and offering and delivery for the human. We really aren't where most individuals want us, believe that we are, which is really far ahead, and we have very sophisticated delivery systems. It's going to take some time. It's going to take the right minds to come together. Yes, we have a culture, but we don't study toxicology in these environments. We study the plant. We study the chemicals that grow on the plant to optimize those chemicals to so we can then utilize them for extraction. But there's so much more to explore, and it's a really exciting time, because I think everyone has an opportunity to really have a voice right now, and the industry really needs innovation.
Yeah.
I feel like we're kind of stuck in a vacuum in a lot of respect.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting you say that maybe the industry is not as far along as we like to think that it is. So where would you like to see it go?
It's a good question. I'd like to see us go into more real research on these chemicals and better testing standards for building the right testing procedures to actually tell a larger and more detailed story. Right now, it seems like we're about 5% of the chemicals we're testing for, about 5% right now, it seems, based on what is known that is there on the plant versus what the test results that we get back from these labs. And that doesn't really give you much insight. It's very it's not even top line. It's just very overview and very general. So I'd love to see a standardization, but I also don't, through that lens, I don't believe we should be hindering labs, because they need to be developing new standards along the way. Yes, we need to agree on something, but we also need to let them innovate and collaborate with policymakers to help them understand the intricacies of testing for these chemicals. I see a lot of different states have a lot of different types of mandates for different requirements that they have in their rules and regs. And if we can't all agree on something behind the scenes, I think it's problematic state to state. It really becomes difficult. If you're an operator in Florida, you have SOPs that are specific to that state and those mandates. You go to California, are those the same SOPs? And how do you standardize a product across markets if you don't have the standardization, from a testing standpoint?
Yeah.
So, I'd also like it to go into, just want to add this is that, there's a lot of legacy growers that have put more work in than they can actually talk about and admit. And the path that they've walked is a path that has been extremely stressful and dangerous for them and their families and their communities. And I feel that sometimes, yes, it's hard to run a business, and not everyone's fit to run a business, but I think it's hard to swallow when we don't have a path for people to create a business in a market, or if you want to call it a state or whatever you want to call it, for these individuals to live on and to pass those torches on. You're talking about generational growers and and individuals have kept these varieties that a lot of these big bucks individuals are coming in and just getting a cut for $600,000, and all of a sudden they have a brand too, and they're growing the same varietals. And you know, it's tough to swallow that there's you know, there's really no one to help the dying breed of community and culture that is, you know, legacy cannabis. It's really hard to see. So a good example of that is where we're at in California. And I think, you know, if we can have better policy, better cooperation from, you know, how things had run from 215 to 64 to where it's going now, I think the conversation could be steered, and we could have a better future for a lot of these individuals that are truly here for the plant, truly here for, you know, the best resin, the best terpene that they can grow on the plant, and the fullest expression of these specific varietals that they can get. So I'd love to see a path for everyone to participate: legacy, the corporations, the, you know, the niche, you know, and that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah. And how much of it is sort of over-regulation creating barriers for some of these, like you said, legacy growers, or those who don't have, you know, endless funding to sort of pay for all the necessary licenses or requirements that the regulators set forth? Like, how much of that is the issue with kind of gatekeeping these folks?
I think it's a lot of over regulation in terms of the steps you have to go to get to market, and what you have to pay for to get that product in market, and what the pit stops of that cost structure. Meaning, if I pay for testing, if I'm making water hash, let me just use an example. I'm testing the flower, I'm testing the water hash, and I'm testing the rosin, right? That's 3 touch points of rosin, or of testing, that could be, you know, half the cost of the overall gram. And, you know, if you're not doing large batches, the state is going to tax you based on that number and the times that you're testing. And then it has to go to distribution, and they have to do their own, right? So there's too many pit stops, and the cost to do these things amounts to, you know, just pricing yourself right out, you know? So I think that's the biggest problem too. And also the cost of, you know, cost per gram now is, you know, it's strong in some states, but really weak in others. And it's really hard when, you know, a farmer's been doing this for a really long time, and then all of a sudden, you know, yeah, they might be making a pound for $4.50, and, you know, but by the time they add up labor and testing costs and everything else, they're more like $7.50, you know. And that's a really difficult thing to swallow as a business that is growing and young. And, you know, look, I was young once too. I learned a lot about business through lots of trial and error, you know. And, you know, I'm fortunate to have come out the other end really sound and, you know, better for it. But you know, I didn't have catastrophic events happen where everything was gone. So that's what I see. Just the way it's evolved is there's a lot of pit stops, and then you have to deal with distribution, which is kind of its own beast in itself. And you know, these things need to be streamlined so individuals can get product to market where they're not taxing themselves literally out of the market.
Yeah. All right. I want to switch gears a little bit and start talking about genetics, because I know you've got quite a collection of cultivars, or amassed one over the years, including some rare genetics, some landrace strains. So what if you could talk about, like, what are some of your favorite cuts that you have, or that are out there, and maybe kind of talk about what we're seeing in the marketplace in terms of different varieties.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when I say we're in a vacuum, I think I'm really talking about that from not only a product SKU perspective, but also a varietals perspective. You know, we let pop culture drive a lot of our decisions as humans around us, and I think in the instance that we're in right now, there's certain players in the game and certain individuals that are really pushing their point of view in terms of what they believe is good, and that's resonating with everybody. And back to the music analogy, there's trends that come along. There's styles of music and there's styles of genetics that are going to come along, and we're all going to start doing that type of style, to stay current, to stay contemporary, right? And cannabis has, just like music, has vintage varietals. It has classic varietals. It has the backbone and the language in which we, are the building blocks, if you will, of it all. That's your NL5s and your skunk one, and your haze, and then moving forward from your haze, you have your modern haze, which is the Jack Herrera, which has kind of been, again, that's another varietal that is in a vacuum. It kind of, those terps, that terpenoline just kind of took over. Jack Herrera is probably, if I'm kind of, making a joke about it, he's kind of like the first kind of influencer. That was Ben Donkers kind of took Jack Herrera and utilized him as an influencer, and created the varietal around him, right? And that was really to curb the sativa to be more commercial, to be a 12, 16 week variety could be actually 11, 12 weeks. So I think, genetics today, I think we're getting a little, not bottlenecked, but, I think just in the commercial sense, we're all growing the same things, and we're all trying to package them differently, and they're predominantly the same. And, this guy may have used more sugars at week 7 than the next, but predominantly at scale in a commercial setting, it's all the same stuff. You go on everyone's menu, it's a version of each other. And look, the cannabis is it's such a vast, look at the Cannapedia. It's such a vast sea of amazing chemotypes and phenotypes. And I wonder, yes, I understand in commercial that we have to stay within certain scheduling, but I always wonder why we pigeonhole ourselves to try to get things out onto a market to just stay relevant. And listen, I'm a true believer, if you're not innovating, you're dying. And if you're just buying and growing the same cuts everybody else is, that's not innovating to me. And there's just so much good stuff out there. I have Boulder landrace stuff that I was gifted that, I would still consider a hybrid of sorts. Sure, it's quote, air quotes, landrace, but you can see the expressions out of these plants that they're robust. They have great resin production. Their terpene profiles are super intense. They're a bit more spicy and a bit different than a lot of these contemporary varietals, but they're very special, very different in terms of how they produce and all the things that go along with that. So I would love to see people start to explore just new avenues. And yeah, the thing that's really interesting to me is like flavors now, this idea of flavors, right, are all being repackaged and represented to us. But none of this stuff is really new in terms of taste, right? All of these flavors have been here. When GMO came through, it was just like a really great super skunk to me. It just started really producing. It had this really dank, beautiful, Chem D feel to it, but it was tight, it had better, tighter structure. So that's where the Girl Scout cookie came in on that as an example of a contemporary variety that everyone grows. And look, most of these things are grown time and time again because it's horticulturally sound to do that. It's at scale. It's why people love to hate on Blue Dream, but man, if you've ever grown that variety, it's pretty great to grow. Do I think there's much better things? Yeah. But in that moment, you see why. You're like, oh yeah, okay. It's insane. That's a great plant. It's a grower's plant. So on the flip side, OG Kush is not really a grower's plant. It's really sparse. It's really lanky. It falls over all the time. It needs lots of support. So, in commercial settings, those plants are hard to grow and they don't yield much, So my point is that there's a lot to explore. there's a lot of great breeders out there today that we just didn't have before. You could really count them on your hands for a while. It was really, that was it. And beyond that was like, of course, the common term, a pollen chucker, right?
Mhm.
But let's face it, most of our contemporary and varietals that we have seen through the 90s were all bag seed. Chem 91, Chem 4, Chem 1, Sour D, all these things were not actually bred by someone intentionally. They were people that were good stewards of the plant. So with that, I encourage people to explore the bag seed that you were going to throw out. Grow seeds and, be a good champion, a good steward of them. I'm not saying you're going to find the next ChemD, but I think it's good to live in that world of I want to explore and, in the world of discovery.
Yeah. No, and it sounds like from what you're saying that sort of all the overhead, all the additional testing, all the licenses is sort of stifling innovation, right? Because you want to
It
grow these
is.
plants that are going to yield the most and that are proven winners in retail too. Like they're gonna sell. So
Right.
sort of the appetite to really put yourself out there and take a risk is not really there.
Yeah. And especially when you have people to answer to, right? If let's say you're a company that has a set schedule and you only have a set amount of rooms, you can only produce a set amount of pounds per month, per year. You have to stick to the schedule because that's tied to other things that are way outside of creativity, right?
Mm.
These are hardline things that don't incorporate creativity. But I have to remind everyone and invite them to say, look, then you need to build creativity into the business plan. Because if you don't
Right.
have it, then what are you truly doing? You're just, is that what you want? So that's one thing I truly look at a lot is how people are looking at the world around them and the space that they occupy. And again, it's retail is predominantly not all that different than one another. Go to another shop, it's just
Yeah.
the registers and to the left instead of the right, and
Right.
there might be a touch screen in that corner instead of the left hand side corner, right? But predominantly the education isn't really there yet, and
No.
we don't have the language quite yet to be educational on a sales floor and to be able to talk about a varietal in a way that actually does its justice. Is really, it's tough, man. But it's something that I really hope that we can get a good handle on in the next 5 to 10 years and start to develop language around the right way to talk about cannabis. It's really hard, man. It's as much as we all think we know, we just don't know.
Yeah. No, and you're spot on with, the retail experience being very similar. I mean, I can only speak really to here in Massachusetts, and I know it might be different in other states, but I
Sure.
mean, you look at the menus and it's all the same stuff. They're only really reporting on THC, CBD content. They
Right.
don't even really talk about the terpenes.
Right.
And it's sort of like, how am I supposed to know if one's better than the other?
Right.
And I mean, it's all THC dominant too. Like you rarely ever see a 1-to-1 or any other, even just different ratios of CBD to THC, let alone
Yeah.
terpenes. So yeah, I agree with you. There's just a huge
Yeah.
vacuum.
we need to be exploring more cannabinoids. To your point, to the 1-to-1 point, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 20-to-1,
Yeah.
40-to-1. I mean, listen, there's a lot of there's lots to be explored with how cannabinoids interact with one another, and then how that interaction interacts with you. And to your point here, THCA and TH delta 9 has ruled the game, right? It is the quantitative selling point
Yeah.
for bud tenders right now. And I have to say this out loud: that is completely a false sense of reality. That is not going to tell you anything about what that varietal is going to do for you individually at all. it's going to give you a glimpse into what the testing told you. What could possibly be there by mass, by weight, right? And furthermore, it's not telling you how that variety was taken down or trimmed or cured, and are the trichome heads cloudy or amber? Things like this are widely left out of the conversation. And harvest date. When was it harvest? Do you buy based on expiration date? I mean, when you go into Whole Foods, you buy based on expiration date and the back label, right? And the unfortunate part about cannabis is we can't lead with the back label quite yet. But I think that what we can do is we can look at the chemical properties by volume and generally start to draw these correlations between what your bioassay is telling you, and you can start physically kind of interacting with this product in a way that tells you the results. So I do think that there's value in the data. I think we need to start looking at it from an educational standpoint and build better language around it. So then the bud tenders that we give these amazing products to can actually talk about them and have a person walk away with some kind of subtype of substance that allows them to be better educated and better for it.
Yeah. No, it's a great point you make about, how it was aged or how it was cured. And, I always sort of draw the analogy, whether appropriate or not, to alcohol, right? Like a lot of whiskey products are marketed based on, how they were aged, which type of barrels they were put in. So, I mean, the whole concept shouldn't really be foreign to people that, we could be looking past just data points that come out of the lab, that there's more to the end product than that.
That's right. And, back to this one-to-one thing, I want to touch on that just one more time, is one of my favorite varieties for searching for those types of things is the work that Ringo did, Ringo's Gift, and the varieties that have come off of that. Harlequin is another one from Wade Laughter. House of Harlequin has been a staple, I think, in those types of ratios of cannabinoids, and the work that he has put in over the years to make sure that those varieties are in circulation is really inspiring and stellar work. Cannatonic is another great variety. So there's quite a few, and that's just me, throwing a few out there. But those are some varieties I think would be great to explore, and there's a lot of possibilities there.
Now, kind of going back to that whole idea of drawing the parallels to alcohol, do you ever envision a future where we'll have something that's similar to, like, say, craft beer, where we have more craft cannabis, like these smaller growers who maybe do smaller batches of these more unique varieties? I know it doesn't sound like, given the climate today, that's really feasible, but potentially that'd be great, right?
Yeah, I think it would be great. Boutique cannabis is, cannabis is a perishable. I just want to start saying that. Had to get that in there. Yeah. Cannabis is a perishable, and there's a point when you do have too much. And I think that's something not everyone has the foresight to check themselves on. When they start looking at balance sheets and pounds per month, it starts to you get in a different mindset. And I invite everyone to look at this from a more practical standpoint and, ask yourself, could we be better for it if we focus on other things rather than more? Look at the industrial age. It's mediocre products for a mediocre environment. And that shouldn't be cannabis. I don't, sure, there's people that want that angle, and you have to kind of ask yourself who you want to be. But I think that there's a world where craft cannabis is what people truly want, and I think that's the world that we're gonna that will shape up eventually. If we can learn from all the other markets that have developed around us, and specifically a federal market, going big has not really worked out. And growing an ornamental crop like cannabis is very difficult at scale. And you have to be, your teams have to be firing off on all cylinders. Everybody has to be in great communication. The systems have to be running great. in most all cases, that's not the case, and that's problematic, I think, for high quality cannabis and all of these things that we've been speaking about, which is getting bulbous and capitate sessile and capitate stalked, resin glands to grow in large amounts, and the nascent chemicals to grow within them. You have to have, you start at 100%, and everything you do wrong knocks a point off, right? And it's, whether it's environmental in your VPD or PPFD, you don't know. But all of these things together have to be in harmony, and that harmonics has to come together in a really methodical way to make high quality cannabis at scale happen. And I don't think the world's seen that yet. I think we've seen some pretty great things happen. I think the industry is evolving in a really interesting way, but there's a lot of room there for improvement. And I invite everyone to look at, just because you can, should you?
Yeah. No, that's a good point about, growing at scale, and kind of going back to this whole idea of, everyone's growing the same thing, and how much of that is that because, if you were growing all different types of varieties, you're going to have them in different environments that are sort of best suited for those plants. And like, that's just not going to work.
We're not there yet, in terms of, genetics. Look, we're super far away from this idea of standardization, and maybe there are teams that aren't sharing the information that I don't know about, which is entirely possible. And I always say this: if you're thinking about it, it's happening. We have a long way to go to say that these varieties should be grown in these regions at these temperatures. We've just a lot of data to collect and a lot of breeding to do to be able to get the genetics in a place like that. But I hope one day we have some ideology around that. But I don't. At the same time, I want to say this as well: is like, I don't. In the pursuit of standardization, let's not lose sight of creativity and the fact that F1s and the idea of not leaving an F1 is exciting. Now, I think that the industry has pigeonholed itself to not go past F1 because people are just moving on too quick, right? But to stabilize something, to have something that's truly unique and uniform, I think we're a long ways away from that.
Yeah. And I guess another thing that kind of just struck me too is, if, until the industry sort of keeps up and they're able to innovate and grow these different varieties, I mean, I guess there's always the option to grow yourself, right? To home grow. And that's a good way to express, or to kind of varieties.
Everybody should grow at home. Everyone should have plants at home. I think look, growing cannabis is very hard. It's not an easy task. And I think it's important for people to understand that. It's again, back to music. It's like music. You can grab a guitar from Guitar Center, but you still have to learn how to play it before you get in front of people. And that's similar here. You got to learn and go through it and understand what spider mites are. Well, nowadays, what PM looks like, and what the hop laden viroid might look like. These are all things that those are two newer things that we didn't have as prevalent back in the early 2000s and late 90s. But these are things that you have to go through, I think. And sometimes, listen, you can grow some amazing stuff, and you can have your own version of what you see around you in pop culture.
So you mentioned PM and hop latent viroid kind of being these newer issues on the scene that cultivators have to deal with. I guess I was more familiar with hop latent viroid sort of being newer, but I was interested to hear that PM wasn't as much of an issue years ago when you were first getting started.
Yeah, no, honestly, those types of diseases, I was not I was not aware of, in, let's say, 99, 2000, 2001. And then that's when I started reading more about powdery mildew. and seeing more powdery mildew being passed around through cuts, or friends that were, saying, "Hey, my whole grow is bombed out. What do we do?" And that's where products like Green Cure came in, and sulfur and all these things were being talked about at a time like that. Now, was PM a disease that's been identified? Yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
for myself and other growers, we were not as infected by things like that at all. Sure, you'd see the case of like, mites and stuff, but again, we didn't have russet mites, right? We didn't have these super bugs that took out whole gardens in the matter of 72 hours. So it's, those types of things were really new at the time. And then, of course, we made all kinds of bad mistakes. Everybody used Eagle 20. I mean, gosh, it was bad. And again, this is all because we didn't have anyone to talk to. If we had a bigger pipeline of communication, everyone could have been better educated at the time, and we just weren't. And I think that's highly contributed to that. And then fast forward to today with hop latent viroid, we had identified a couple plants that came from a nursery in California that were hot for HLBP and with hop latent viroid. And, it's heartbreaking to see things like that because we don't have the right guidance that's publicly available, and a roadmap that doesn't cost 12 months and 15K to get a varietal clean again. And the best answers I've gotten were cull the plant today, or you could go into the deep dive, right? So how, as a community, do we start to talk about this and have dialogue on it to help each other not have this type of viroid wreak havoc on your businesses? Because cannabis has always been kind of loose, right? Like, yeah, it's weed, we grow plants, but today it's not loose, it's tight, there's margins, there's people that have their whole lives on the line, and a viroid like this will wipe out your whole business. And from growing these plants and studying a hop latent viroid in confined spaces and having my own bioassay with it, as I call it, you can see how it performs and adversely could totally ruin everything. I mean, the way that the flower structure grows on these plants versus plants that don't have it is night and day. And if you didn't know what you were looking for, you would never know. You just, oh, that's a low yielding plant. That's just that's the way she is. That's not the case. Oh, she's, they didn't produce enough terpenes this run. Well, no, it's because it's sick. How does a human perform when you're sick, right? How is a plant supposed to perform when they're sick? So those are the things that we have to be really, we have to be looking out for, not only ourselves, but each other. Because one day you're going to want to cut from your buddy who's going to be happily giving it to you. And you're going to then grow it and start cloning other things with it, not even knowing, because it's your buddy and you trust your buddy. And your buddy's just a nice guy. And he's, unbeknownst to him, he's passing, hop latent viroid to your whole garden. And it's a domino effect of just great intentions with the worst outcome, and that's what I see today is, nurseries, they have all the best intentions. We all do. We all have great intentions, but if we're not checking ourselves, and that's why I think, the work that Medicinal Genomics is doing is super important to the future of where agriculture and horticulture is going for cannabis. Because we need to have the insight to be able to make better decisions that are educated based on cleanliness, vigor, and fit to perform. And if these things aren't done, one day we might find sour diesel, Chem 91, and Chem D completely out of our language because the last man standing got HLV because he took a cut from his buddy.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, and that is sort of the most, at least in my mind, the most kind of insidious thing about it is that it's so, like you said, unless you knew what you were looking for, you wouldn't know you even had it. I
That's
mean,
right.
things like PM, it's pretty obvious. You have white splotches all over your plant, like, oh, I got PM. But hoploid and viroid, it's a lot harder to identify.
Yeah, it's not impossible, but it's from a visual standpoint, there are cues that I've been learning that the plant will give you, like your stems will just snap, like clean, like surgical clean,
Yeah.
boom, snap right in half. It's like cucumber almost. It's like a cucumber snap. So you start to pick up on these cues that a sick plant will give you. But again, there's no real literature that will say that it's definitively can be eradicated from the plant quite yet. There's some, and if someone does out there on this, that's a listener, know a way, please reach out, and I'd love to speak with you on to how you're approaching eradication, because most of the things we see are therapies and different TC and meristem paths to do it. However, there's been no definitive evidence that it doesn't come back.
Yeah. And this is probably a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I read that it's not common for HLVD to be passed through seeds. So what about sort of selfing a sick plant and trying to grow from those seeds?
I think that needs to be studied more. I've heard that 5% of the seed could be infected.
Right.
It's really, who knows? I think that's the larger honest answer there. But I think that larger populations and larger studies need to be done to better identify what is being passed on. And again, it needs a host, right? So how is the seed going to be a host? So there's a lot to learn, but I think that that's a really good point. I'm not sure if an S1 would do the trick, but I think it's something that again, we need more long-term studies. We need we need to really understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done on that front. All right. I definitely do want to be mindful of your time, Collin, and thanks so much for taking the time. But before I let you go, I wanted to give you a chance to plug any website, social media, any way people can get in touch with you or follow what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me on Vessel Life Science on Instagram and vessellifescience.com. We are extractionists. We're cultivators, and we are building different SKU offerings and different brands in the marketplace through the country. And I'm really excited to be working with in particular company to date that we're doing some really great projects together that will release solventless products into the markets. So you should see some products next year start to trickle out. And in the meantime, we're focusing heavily on genetic R&D, formulation R&D, and innovation on all of those fronts. So, if people want to reach out to us, please do. And I'd love to collaborate with anyone that's interested.
All right, excellent. And when those products start coming out, we'll have to have you back on again, because we didn't even touch on solventless extraction. So that'll be for another podcast.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, solventless extraction. That's our number one. So I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks again for the time, and hope to see you out at CanMed.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Collin Palmer. Check out the links in the show description to learn more about the topics we discussed. And thanks again to our sponsor, Pheno Express. Our next episode will drop November 10th. That's 2 weeks from today. In the meantime, please do check out canmedevents.com to view the CanMed 2022 schedule, explore the CanMed archive, listen to previous podcast episodes, and sign up for email alerts. If social media is more your thing, you can stay connected with us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Speaking of Facebook, check out the CanMed Community Facebook group. It's a great way to connect with fellow attendees and presenters in between events. And one last thing, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Doing so really helps the podcast reach more listeners. Okay, that's it from us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and please do join us for the next CanMed Coffee Talk.